Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of the Valley View. And this week we're going to be talking to members of the Pacific Green Party, both the local Salem chapter and the state. And joining me today, we got Pat Driscoll from the state, and he's the treasurer of the Green Party.
Yeah.
We also have Byron Harron, who's with the Salem group, as well as Matt Sanchez, who's also with Salem. So welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And we should probably start talking about green activities, and one of them is coming up, and one of the reasons why I want to do this show is that the Green Party is going to have a convention here in Salem on November 23rd, Saturday, and that's from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., and you're going to be talking about all things green, and that includes subjects other than the green movement, the environmental movement, because the Green Party means a whole lot more than that. And I should mention to our viewers that I am a member of the Pacific Green Party, but we will be having other parties come in and do the same kind of routine where they talk a little bit about their party and what kind of activity they're doing. So Pat, maybe you could start off and tell us a little bit about what's going on statewide with the Green Party.
Well, at the moment, the Green Party is heavily involved in the anti-GMO initiatives. We have in Jackson County a measure that's actually on the ballot that we worked with groups in Jackson County. There's an initiative in Lane County that the Lane Greens helped to support that is unfortunately in court at the moment. Will be until February of 2014. And there's also an anti-GMO and local food rights initiative in Linn-Benton County that's being worked by the Linn-Benton chapter along with the local group there, and that unfortunately is also in court. So we've really been spending a fair amount of time this year working, grassroots level on anti-GMO and local food rights issues.
Well, that is an important subject as someone who enjoys eating. So, so Byron, maybe you can tell us what's going on here locally in the Salem chapter. I understand that you're just getting started again, and because it's been kind of inactive for a while now.
So we actually reestablished the Salem chapter back in August this summer. So what we've been doing is we've been just starting to pool our resources, figure out who the local people are, starting to get contacts, figuring out what the local climate is and stuff like that. And we've also drafted 2 initiatives that are statewide initiatives, and then we're starting to collect signatures for those as well.
Okay, and so so if people are interested in getting active here in the local chapter, how can they do that? And we'll be running credits at the end of the show, so if you miss it at home, it'll be a chance for you to pick it up. But how can people get active here?
Well, my phone number will actually be on those credits at the end, so they can actually just call me and I'll answer. And we have a lot of ways people could get involved.
Okay.
We also have monthly meetings. So we meet at the Ike Box downtown in Salem the first Monday of every month at 7 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good way then for people to
Yeah, they can literally just come and start
check it out.
Feel free.
Okay.
see what we're all about.
And also there is a website, the Pacific Green Party, and then you have the Salem chapter. If
With
you
our
go
contact information.
Right. Well, I mean, so that people could also see what the Green Party stands are on various issues.
Absolutely.
And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're having the Green Party, Pacific Green Party's state convention for the fall here this weekend. So this is open to the public. People that are just somewhat interested can come down and see what happens as well, right?
Absolutely.
There'll be a lot of state business going on, I would assume, but there'll be a lot of discussion about the various issues.
Yes.
And the public is welcome.
They are welcome, yes. Come on down.
Okay. So I think we ought to talk, because a lot of times people get the impression that the Green Party is just about the environmental movement. So maybe, Pat, you could start off and talk a little bit about what's important to you as a member of the Green Party.
Well, one of the things that attracted me to the Green Party is that it's such a grassroots organization. We really don't have people at the top telling us, what to do, or organizational structures that are driving us. It's all arises out of the grassroots, and I think that's one of the things that we are working towards is to try and increase the diversity of discussion in the political world, to have more issues being talked about by more people, inviting people in to do that, as opposed to, now you have very limited points of view being expressed, both by political parties and of course in the media. So the idea of grassroots democracy is you give everybody a voice, and give them an opportunity to vote for their values, and that's what grassroots democracy is all about.
And Byron, what led you to the party?
I tend to come from a fairly leftist political view. So for me, it wasn't necessarily it was the environmental aspect, but it was also their emphasis on workers' rights and supporting workers' ability to unionize and giving them protections and benefits so that they can't just be stomped over by large corporations or businesses.
So they get a say on what happens at work.
Yeah,
as
so
well.
it's like what Pat was saying, but it's an extension of that into the economic realm as well.
And that is important because a lot of times it seems like there really isn't good discussion going on at work or in the public sphere. And so that is an important. Matt, what brought you to the Green Party?
Well, it's funny he should mention big money and all that stuff, because that's kind of what sealed the deal for me. I wasn't really politically active until just recently. I always was a little bit disillusioned with the entire American democratic system. You can see all of this money pouring into these bipartisan campaigns, and it just really kind of made me sick. So one of the things that drew me, I think, to the Green Party is the fact that they don't accept any kind of corporate financing or handouts like that. Really sweetened the pot for me.
Oh, okay.
That plus all of the environmental and human rights work that we do is amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually, in my time in Sacramento, there was actually a Green Party member that got voted into the state assembly, and I got together some Green Party members to staff the office, and so we had, the first day we're down there, it's kind of like everybody from the statewide Green Party is there, but immediately thereafter came all the suits, all the lobbyists and like that were lined up out the door to try to lobby this one Green Party member. And it's a lesson that I think people aren't really aware of, is how much lobbying goes on at the state houses. And it's not just Sacramento, it's here in Salem as well. Mm-hmm. It's not as bad, but it's still there. And there's a lot of that goes on. And that's sometimes where the money really comes into play, is behind the scenes, not in the campaigns even. It's out there while you're doing your day-to-day job as an assemblyman or state senator and like that. Mm-hmm. So what other kind of issues are there as far as the state is concerned as addressing here in Oregon? Because that is something that I think needs to be kind of looked at as well.
Well, we're also very supportive of keeping the forests intact. Currently, there is legislation proposed by Congressman Peter DeFazio, that's also supported, I believe, by Senator Wyden, that would open up clear-cutting again of Oregon forests. And particularly these days, in view of what's happening with the climate and the need to, improve and increase our carbon sinks, it doesn't make any sense to cut trees down, and clear-cut forests. It's just very destructive on the environment, and the money from it is going to, of course, your corporate businesses.
Yeah, it is interesting that clear-cutting, back in the 50s and 60s was really looked down upon. Usually what they meant by forestry is the forester would go out there and mark trees to be cut, not a whole hillside. And I mean, we've seen some of the destruction that happens when you clear cut a hillside.
Oh,
and
amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's devastating to some communities.
Yeah.
And so, especially here on the western end of Oregon, where you get a lot of rainfall, it is a big problem. So, Byron, do you have any other issues that are kind of hot button for you that the state party addresses that?
Well, I mean, with our local chapter, with those initiatives that we're.
Well, I mean, just what brings you,
Oh.
another thing that brings you to the table as far as being a Green Party member.
Oh, right. I like that they're very vehement in their stance on feminism and women's rights. So a lot of the Democratic Party is kind of like wish-washy about it, and whereas the Green Party is very like, feminism is just the right way to go about things. I mean, warranted feminism is a very broad topic, but they're very much about like LGBTQ rights and supporting the community. And I don't feel like most other parties are necessarily on the same page with that.
How about you, Matt?
I think nonviolence is
the big-
a pretty big issue for me. We're surrounded by war. We're mired in it. It just never goes away. You turn on the TV, you look at a magazine, you go anywhere on the internet, and it's you see it. It's everywhere.
And that's generally, if you look at foreign policy,
Yeah. Oh,
the
yeah.
two major political parties are very bipartisan in that respect. You very seldom see them opposing the wars that go on. You never see them really opposing military spending, which is, basically the United States spends as much as the rest of the world combined. So it is a big issue.
Yeah.
And there have been any number of studies that have shown that for every dollar you spend on the military, you actually don't get a full dollar back. Whereas if you spend it on, cleaning up the environment or using solar for your energy or other,
Absolutely, yeah.
you get a lot more money back. Even welfare creates a lot more money than military spending,
Right.
which is one of the things that I always find ridiculous when they start talking about cutting Social Security or welfare and things like that.
I think you also have to consider like the sociological impact of the wars on our own citizens, not just the people that we're bombing and blowing up.
Oh, sure.
But we're raising an entire generation for the past 10 years that hasn't known anything but war.
Well, you can go back further than that.
It's true. It's true.
I mean, Pat and I come from a different generation,
Right.
and we were much more familiar with the Vietnam. And if you think about it, ever since World War II, there's not been one declared war, although there's been any number of invasions and military actions or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
The United States is constantly being involved in those things because they spend so much on the military. They see that as the only tool in their toolkit, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and as a veteran, and I served during the Vietnam War. After the war, looking at just what happened, the utter devastation, what happened to the people, I could not imagine the United States ever making that mistake again, of waging a war in a country where they couldn't speak the language, they couldn't read the signs, they didn't understand the culture. That's just a self-defeating approach to a war. And that was after Vietnam. I said, this is never going to happen again. And then we had it happen again with Iraq, Afghanistan, and it's, there's a mindset in people that we have to break regarding war and its impact on people and being responsible personally for taking action to prevent it from happening.
And taking those other avenues.
And taking other avenues, exactly.
absolutely.
And negotiating with, not dictating to other countries would be a big first step. And I look at what's the situation right now with the United States and Iran, where the United States is trying to dictate to Iran about their nuclear capabilities. And it's funny because Iran has said that they aren't interested in developing nuclear weapons, and this has been their policy for quite some period of time. Whereas Israel, the one that complains about it, has over 300 nuclear weapons.
Right.
And is the only nuclear-armed nation, in that part of the world. Although Iran is actually surrounded by Pakistan and India, as well as Israel, who has threatened them. But we side on the people that are, in support of having a nuclear-free Middle East.
Yeah, and the whole nuclear issue is one that you don't hear a lot of discussion about, active discussion by politicians or the media. And I mean, frankly, we have a crisis that's happening today in Fukushima, Japan, where there's a reactor that's out of control, that's leaking radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. And this is an issue that affects Oregon, because we're talking about radioactive seawater in the Pacific Ocean arriving on our coasts within the next 2 years, I believe.
Well, yeah, I've heard some say that they're not going to eat fish out of the Pacific after this year because it's just too dangerous. And like they've already shown signs that like tuna and other fish have increased levels of isotopes and everything else in their system.
And there's no need to have to rely upon nuclear power. If you look at other examples of other countries, like Germany, for example, where the Greens participate in government, and German people, in their voting, know that green is good and have voted to make sure that both their government and their corporations incorporate green values. Germany has announced they're shutting off every one of their nuclear power plants. And as time goes along, they are also shutting down their coal plants one by one, and they're replacing them with solar energy, with wind energy. So it's a good example of where green influence has accounted for really a country taking the right steps towards reducing their energy use, of addressing climate change in a political environment that allows other voices, such as the Greens, to be heard.
Yeah, that is an important part, because I think a lot of times it's like when you get the two major parties, it's like, oh, it's either this or that. But there's a lot more views involved, and there's a lot, and quite often they're in sympathy when it comes to corporations and foreign policy, as I mentioned earlier. So what are some of the things that, to stay on the ballot is also an issue, because you have to what are the requirements for staying on the ballot here in Oregon, Pat?
Well, we basically have to achieve roughly 11,000 registered voters in the state, which we have. But to do that, we have to continually keep attracting new voters. And that really is one of the key things we'll be discussing at convention, is our voter registration drive for 2014. So that's one avenue, is just to register new green voters. The second is to run candidates. If we run a statewide candidate, then as long as we achieve 0.5% of the total vote, we can remain on the ballot. And so we'll also be looking at finding and recruiting and running a statewide green candidate in 2014. That's a topic of discussion at the convention as well.
Well, that'd be a kind of a prime topic, I would imagine.
Yes, it would be.
Yeah.
and the Green Party tries to vet these candidates, so that it's not just like an individual deciding that they're going to run for a statewide office or a local office or something like that. The Green Party does try to vet their candidates. Is that correct?
Yes, we actually have a primary where folks have to, present themselves before convention, and so we have the opportunity at convention to question them. We've done that with presidential candidates at our primary. We've had the Green Party presidential candidates appear via social media, come in with like on YouTube live stream video.
Yeah, Skype, things like that.
And Skype.
Yep.
To present to our Oregon Pacific Green Party for us to evaluate them and vote on them at our primary.
So, so during this statewide convention, that'll be a part of this, will it? Where you'll be talking to people that are potential candidates. So this might be of interest to the public as well, is to see that process as to who emerges from that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so I would imagine your statewide candidate has to be pretty well known during this convention, because you really need to get moving in the spring, I would imagine, for 2014.
Yeah, well, we will have another convention in the springtime. We'll also have a primary convention, which was in May. It's actually after the Democratic and Republican primaries. But and we'll also be holding campaign and candidate training classes. So we will be looking to host those probably here in Salem, in Eugene, Portland, where we'll provide expertise and resources to people who want to run, and train them as to how to run for office. Because if you're running for state office in particular, you're running for Congress, there's some things that are useful to know. And luckily we have candidates who have run at all levels in Oregon, from local up to governor, that can help with that.
So, what are some of the other issues here in Oregon, though? Because you've mentioned food safety and GMO, and there were some other initiatives that the local Salem chapter was interested in, and maybe you could go into a little bit of detail on what those initiatives are about.
Oh, right. So right now we've drafted these 2 initiatives, like you said, with a lot of like legal oversight and stuff like that. So we're not just like some punk kids making these things up. So what the first one is, the Green Packaging Initiative. It takes the Bottle Bill of 1973 and it broadens the language of it to encompass all consumer packaging. So what that does is, under the law, it makes it so that either your packaging has to be compostable, so it'd break down in a compost heap, or it has to be refundable like beverage containers are now. So what this means is that if you go to like a store, like if you shop at like Fred Meyer's or like Grocery Outlet or Costco, and you end up with all this packaging, instead of throwing it away and it going to some landfill, for 100 years or God knows how long, you'd be able to return it to the store for a 10-cent deposit, just like beverage containers. Or you'd be able to put it into your compost heap and break it down. So we could have some type of like citywide composting program like they do in Corvallis. So in essence, our waste due to packaging would be dramatically reduced.
And what's the other initiative? You mentioned 2.
Yeah, the other initiative seeks to limit the expansion of the fossil fuel industry and infrastructure in Oregon.
And what does that mean? I mean, limiting the infrastructure.
Well, basically, it means that they are fossil fuels would not be able to expand any farther than they already have, and that's the processing, the transportation, and the mining for materials. That includes fracking and oil and coal.
Yeah. I mean, the logic behind it's fairly straightforward. The way that we see it is global warming is a fact, or global climate change, and that is a result of CO2 emissions being put out into the environment. And if you're going to start reducing the CO2 emissions, you have to at least, at the very bare minimum, stop producing more infrastructure that increases your ability to emit more of that.
Well, that's very well put, because that is a huge problem. And I should say it's global greenhouse effect, because that's what I think a lot of people kind of miss, is the fact that like we're putting out so much more carbon dioxide. And if you go back about 125 years ago, the level was about 275 parts per million. We're up to like about 400 now.
We just passed 400.
Yeah. So this, people like to say, well, it's due to this or that, but it's not. It's due to our use of fossil fuels. And it has been documented, and there's like 95% of the scientists who have studied this issue say, yes, it is human caused. Now, you can't blame any one individual hurricane or storm like we had last week on this, but you increase the chances of those storms by increasing the heat.
Right. We're going to see much more frequency in those events.
And so, that's why also I think it's important for people to understand why fossil fuels are something that we need to kind of stop now, because we don't need to keep this problem. Like they say, when you're in a hole, you stop digging.
You got it. You got it.
And so that's really what we're talking about here.
Right.
Is trying to look at other ways of producing energy. And sometimes that is going to require personal things that you have to do in your life to make changes. They can't just all be done by the government. And people need to understand that. But we need to be providing people with avenues of doing that that make it easier to switch over.
Yep.
So, well, that was my little soapbox. So there is a fairly heavily strong environmental, but there's also economic. And like one of the things I was always interested of me was that as somebody that worked for a living, is the fact that wages are basically frozen. You talk about Vietnam, and in that era, basically wages have been frozen since like 1973. While productivity has gone way up, but the workers haven't shared in that. And that to me is one of the things that the Green Party has really talked about. Pat and I worked on a campaign in California to raise the minimum wage there, and have it go up as inflation went up. And that was a big fight with even inside the Green Party. But I mean, the Green Party did endorse that. And I mean, really, if we want good wages, we're going to have to do something about manufacturing things here in this country. And we're also going to have to make sure people are paid decent wages. And that might mean increasing taxes on the rich.
You know, that's
Absolutely.
interesting that you mentioned that, because the congressman that I ran against, Congressman Matsui, Democrat, progressive Democrat, was responsible for shepherding NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, through Congress. Even though Congress was controlled by Republicans, he kind of helped craft that and get it through. And that is a source of jobs disappearing out of America, is these quote-unquote free trade. They're not free to workers. They're, you know, it's free to capital. It's not free to workers.
Right.
And it's interesting because I learned that because he's a progressive Democrat, you know, how could he possibly get involved in this arrangement? And unfortunately, it's just a characteristic of a lot of Democrats that they do the Republicans' work for them. And it was really kind of a shock to me to understand that. But
Well, Pat, you know, we should then talk about how much money he raised for every campaign. It was like $500,000 to $750,000, okay, that he raised for every campaign. He didn't have any real opposition from the Republican Party. The Republican Party just felt like, oh, that's a wasted effort. So he almost spent none of that money. And most of the money was raised from pharmaceuticals. And this is in a
Interesting.
It was from a district that didn't have any pharmaceuticals being produced in it. So I mean, you know, that's an example of kind of what we're talking about. Is that, like, if money's going to come in and determine how people look at things and write legislation and rules and like that, a lot of these things come up not just at election.
And, you know, and it's not just the money too. It's I would say political loyalties. So, for example, within the Democratic Party, you have what you would consider progressive Democrats that will not speak out against the president no matter what the president does. Most recently, there was the threat of an attack upon Syria by President Obama. And I contacted Senator Ron Wyden's office every day asking, what is his stand on this? Does he support the president's announcement that they were going to attack Syria? And Senator Ron Wyden would not respond, would not give an opinion as to whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. And I find that really difficult to understand. Here's an issue, war, that is fundamental, and yet here's my elected representative that won't tell me what he thinks, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. They just would not take a stand.
Well, and that brings us, I think, to kind of the point about why we need a Green Party. We need alternatives out there, and I'd really like to encourage our viewers to, you know, look at the Green Party, the Pacific Green Party here in Oregon, as one of those alternatives. I'll be having other political parties in here. And it's funny that you mentioned about the Democrats, because I was a Democratic Party activist for many years, and I just got fed up, and basically for some of the same things that you've been talking about. And I think it really gets to be a point of which party best represents you. And the real challenge is finding a Democrat that agrees with you at least 50% of the time, because I haven't found them, at least the ones running for political office. And so I'd like to thank Pat and Byron and Matt for coming down and sharing about the Green Party.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It's subjects near and dear to my heart. So come back next week to the Valley View, and we'll be on a different topic then. Thank you.